Okay, I'd like to review a little bit of what we did in class so that everybody can be on the same page. First thing I want everybody to realize is costs here are also cost here and here. We just give them different names. So, and on top of that, indirect materials, labor, and expenses are also known as factory overhead. So these nest together. Um, so it's really important that you can distinguish between uh, where they fall at when they get to this side of all of the descriptions and categories. So you have direct materials, you have direct labor, and you have factory overhead that make up cost of goods manufactured. Factory overhead is made up of indirect labor, indirect materials, and indirect expenses. And these are anything that has to do with factory support, but is not directly related to making that product, such as depreciation for the factory, um, manager's salary for the factory, because he's not really, or he or she is not really producing the product, they're overseeing it, they're supporting it. Factory maintenance supplies, same thing. You're looking at indirect materials or wages paid to the packaging department. Now, they are directly handling that product, so they are direct labor. But if you have salaries of process engineers, that's indirect labor because they're not physically touching that product and making it. Kind of see the distinguishment, how to distinguish it. On top of this, you're going to have um, expenses that are selling and administrative expenses, and those don't belong in here whatsoever. They end up over here on the period costs. So anything that does with the office or advertising or property taxes on the headquarter building. Now, those support the product in a way, but they're once more removed than the indirect expenses or materials and labor. So those would be period costs. They don't belong in here. So if you go down through here, you're going to find you have, let's just do a couple. The manager's salary. Well, he's not direct labor. He's not directly working with that product, but he's indirect, which makes him into factory overhead. And factory overhead, then, if you put it into these categories, is in the conversion because conversion costs are direct labor and factory overhead. Yeah, if I want to take it over to the next category, this is a product cost because it's part of cost of goods manufactured. Factory maintenance supplies. Now, that's an indirect material because it's not directly related to any product. It supports the entire production process, right? So that's an indirect material. It's a factory overhead. Goes into conversion because it's factory overhead. And it's a product cost because it's closely related to the product, but not directly related. The salary of the process engineers, same thing. They're not directly working with that product. They're indirect. Um, So they go into factory overhead, they go into conversion, and they're a product cost. Kind of get the feel for what I'm talking about. You're going to have direct labor. These are people who work directly with the product. You're going to have direct materials, which is actually product that or materials that make up the product. You need to be able to come across here and show what they are. Such as wages paid to the packing are direct labor, right? They are a conversion cost. But if you look down here, you find direct labor is also a prime cost. So you want to distinguish and say, oh, it's both. It's used on both sides. And why this becomes so important is because when we get into next week's, we're going to be looking, next week's work, we're going to be looking at conversion costs. So keep that in mind. There's some down here, property taxes for the headquarters. Well, that is actually an admin cost. This has nothing to do with any of these costs in here. So it's just going to be a selling and administrative cost. So fill this out, and after you get done with it, we'll apply the extra points to the quiz. So this is due Sunday. Hope that helps a little bit.